to women. So it will be a bit abbreviated and it will be some quick information, but I want you to go ahead and look up here when you feel a little bit lost or, you know, what time period are we in now? We've got Classical Greek from 753 to 335 BC, Hellenistic time period 335 to 30 BC. The Roman Republic, overlapping Classical Greece 510 to 49 BC, and then the Republic transitions to an empire around 30 BC, or around 49 BC to 476 AD. So we've got some overlapping time period, Greek up here, Roman down here. Be sure to look up there because it will help orient you. It certainly helped orient me when I was working on this. So, okay, without further ado, this is week 2, a part or a part. In week 1, initially women were formed to be a part of things. 2 words. You know, a part of relationship with Adam. And over the centuries, unfortunately, we have become separate, apart. So this is our look for what we're going to be focusing on today. Traditional female roles based on a patriarchal system. We, of course, have to define patriarchalism first. It's a social organization marked by the supremacy of the father and or males, restrictions placed on women in the home, church, and or civic life. We have, unfortunately, females basically being annulled as individuals because of their gender. The male role had the right to depersonalize others, and he was considered above the wife, the child, or the slave. And those 3 categories of individuals owed the master a duty of obedience. He owed no such duty to them. Okay, so completely one-sided. One is served, and the other rules. Well, and this type of patriarchal system did apply in both contemporary pagan and Jewish thought. Okay, so patriarchal society and the daily lives of women we're going to be looking at during all of these time periods today. And the reason we're doing this is to try to better understand the women's issue. We really have to look back in history to see what happened. We have to look for the time period just before Christ, time period during Christ, and then, of course, during the apostolic age, so we can better understand the context of Scripture. So that's what I'm really shooting for with today's session. 2 primary states for free women in a patriarchal system, both defined by her relationship with a man. She's either unmarried or she's married, and her primary function was to produce children. Okay, we've talked about the time frame up here a little bit, and as I mentioned before, you got a lot of overlapping between Greece and Roman, and what I'm going to point out here too is that Egypt's not on here, but we are going to talk briefly about Egypt. Egypt was very advanced in terms of how they treated women. They were a bit more, forgive the word, but, you know, more feminized, and they recognized the abilities of women a lot earlier than other places. Rome was a little bit more forward-thinking, if you will, in terms of women. Greece was quite misogynistic. And Judaism, well, we'll get to Judaism. But so there's a bit of, again, within each culture there's a lot of difference, so we're going to keep highlighting that. Okay, Classical Greece, 753 BC to 335 BC. You've got a lot of masculine versus feminine virtues. These were things that were really solidified during this time period. They looked at the male and female virtues as seeking differences, okay? Remember last week we looked at male and female as complementary beings. The female is made of the same stuff of the male. But during this time period, there was a lot of emphasis on the difference between your typical male and female. We had our exercise last week where we had the guys talk about the guys and women, and we had the women talk about the women and the guys. And there were quite a few different perspectives and traits that we came up with. Well, the Greeks were way more in terms of their distinction on that difference. Aristotle is the man who definitively locked women in the cell of their natural difference. He's quoted as saying, the male is by nature superior and the female inferior. The one rules and the other is ruled. This principle of necessity extends to all mankind. He's also quoted as saying silence is a woman's glory. The belief was that woman had inferior reason and cannot control her passions, especially her sexual passions, and thus must be controlled by the husband or the state. If uncontrolled or excessively educated, she is dangerous.
Well,
okay? We're going to have so much fun today. If you think this is bad, oh my goodness, we're going to have like, okay.
we're dangerous.
All right, so like I said at the beginning, last week we looked at the sameness of male and female. Obviously 2 distinct genders, but they're both human. after sin, that difference became what everybody was focusing on. That sameness became the opposite. That difference has been the fundamental theory that's been used to justify every case of discrimination. You can kind of boil it down to that. All right, so let's take a look at females in classical Greece. Greek women were simple tools of reproduction. If you were a free woman, your job was to produce citizens. If you were a slave woman, your job was to produce slave labor. The Greeks did not train their young. The females did not take an active role in that. Everything about the classical Greek society was designed to fit male needs. It was regulated by a series of laws that established her inferiority and permanent subordination to a man. Typical virtues for a subordinate woman: intense respect for the division of roles. Remember that masculine-female virtue difference. And obedience to such, modesty as well as fidelity. Okay, I am so excited. We are going to have our first skit. All right, I would like the classical Greek female to come on up, and I also need Euripides to come on up, please. Okay, everybody remember, we are amongst friends. We are in roles, okay? So what these guys are going to be forced to do or say is nothing about what they're actually, what their belief system is, okay? So, Colleen, come on up with me. And I'm apologizing in advance for this. All right, you are going behind closed doors into the gynecium, and just stay there until I can get you.
Okay.
Sorry. Okay, so our classical Greek woman is basically confined in a center, a part of the home. The women were just completely segregated from the men. Men did not have access to the gynecium. She was completely confined. Total segregation of the female sex, physically isolated. Married women had no chance to meet people outside of the members of their own household. And men did not have access to the gynecium. Okay? She is literally out of sight, out of mind. Okay, so Euripides, you are going to read what's up here on the screen, if you will.
A servant ought never to go near a woman, but mute beasts ought to live with her, so that she has no one to talk to or to take messages back from her.
Wow.
Thank you very much. Okay, Euripides and Colleen will be free. All right, you're free. She's transcended several hundred years. All right, very good. Thank you guys so much for that.
You should have gave her a mute beast or something.
I didn't hear anything that was going on.
This one gets a muzzle.
Women during that time period were completely isolated. Men did not exactly want to have
You were
any
segregated.
That lady, right?
Okay, so we're going to take a look at wives in classical Greece, also called the daimon or the gyne. They were for the production of legitimate children. That was one reason I honestly believe that they were kind of confined. Women were viewed as not being capable of controlling their sexual urges. So in order to make sure that she produced a legitimate heir, well, we got to make sure that she has no access to any other male. During the classical period in Athens, a wife was actually not officially considered a part of her husband's family until the first kid was born. All right, so if you're barren, sorry ladies, you're out of luck. Pretty rough there. Clearly, a classical Greek woman would have little genuine sexual pleasure and certainly lacking in respect and companionship, being confined back there and not having access to the other sex. Athenian law of all periods tended to regard the wife as a veritable child, having the legal status of a minor compared to her husband. So that's roughly the classical Greek woman, classical Greek wife. Let's look at non-wives in classical Greece. An Athenian male was allowed to have three possible women: the wife, the concubine, and the hetera. The concubine was basically for the care of the male body in basically regular sex. Sometimes the concubine was received into the conjugal home. Basically, she had the same relationship as the wife did, but she wasn't the official partner. The hetera is very, very interesting. The name actually means companion, and this is kind of equivalent to the modern geisha. That's sort of what you can think of with that. The hetera was for pleasure. She was paid for sex. It was non-exclusive and frequent, so she could have multiple males. So the name means companion, trying to gratify the man on a level beyond just sex. She was more educated than a woman who was destined for marriage. She was intended professionally to accompany men where wives and concubines couldn't go. So she had the highest freedom of movement publicly, although she was basically she was beyond a paid prostitute, but she was a paid companion. I think it's very interesting because in essence, everything about classical Greece segregated the female and made sure that she was contained, if you will. But they still kind of were like, we sort of miss them. There's something about this that we need the woman on certain occasions, certain social events. You know, she'll look good on my arm or whatever. So the city basically came up with a heterai solution so that women could be around when necessary, but the rest of the time, forget about it. Which I just find very, very interesting. All right. Other categories of females in classical Greece, you have the slave. Female slaves were expected to satisfy the needs of the family's men. She could be sold at any time and thus removed from any family she might have had with another slave. Okay, and any children she had either with that slave or with the master did not belong to her. They belonged to the master. Okay, so being a slave back then, well, at any time was not great, but here she's got no rights over her body or over the production fruit of her body. Prostitutes, servile status, very strong social disapproval. The prostitutes did have liberty, but the price of that liberty was harlotry. The sacred prostitutes, I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce that, basically were consecrated to various deities, and they sold themselves to passerby, giving the proceeds to the temple. It's just very interesting. You've got a couple different versions of prostitutes throughout classical Greece. You've got the hetera, the concubine, potentially the slave, the regular prostitutes, and then your sacred prostitutes. So they were considered privileged. They had greater wealth and protection because of their sacredness. A lot of versions of other women besides wives, but unfortunately almost all of them had a negative sexual connotation as a part of their lives. All right. The culture of classical Greece was very strict about what we've talked about. Any ideas to the contrary were considered subversive teaching, corrupting, and a disruption of traditional values, and thus seen as endangering the city. This is very contrary to what most of us think of Greek culture, which basically embraces curiosity. They want to explore all of the new ideas and things that come down, and they're very passionate about learning about new subjects. But when it came to women, no. They need to be in their place. This is the end of the story. We're not interested in what anybody else has to think about them. So very contrary to the typical Greek culture. They were very solid about their views on women were correct, and they didn't need anything else about it. Throughout the classical literature, you do see the invisible fear of the negative power of women. Euripides, who stated the line so wonderfully that mute beasts should live with her so that nobody can go back and forth. Why would you be afraid of somebody that you consider inferior? But they had that invisible fear that she was capable of destruction. She was capable of being corrupted and whatnot. So we see that throughout the literature. It's very interesting. Okay, alternative forms of sexuality in classical Greece. We talked about the Athenian male could have several versions of females. The Greeks did consider homosexual relations just as natural as heterosexual. So obviously both of these are a huge departure from what God created in Eden to become one male, one female, not the other way around or any version of such. Homosexuality was used as an instrument to train future citizens. It kind of had a pedagogic function to that love, which required an adult and adolescent. So the adolescent is learning from his male mentor and also exchanging sex. Homosexuality also reinforced female segregation. If we weren't segregated enough already, they didn't really want to have anything to, it just reinforced the segregation there. In addition, bisexual gods were worshipped in many parts of Greece, and the rites celebrated in which men and women often exchanged clothing and roles. Okay, so this is very important to keep in mind when we think about the culture of what surrounded the early Christian church. Okay, I know I'm talking about classical Greece right now, but bisexual gods were throughout the entire period. So if you have men and women actively switching roles during religious rites and switching clothing, there's a lot of, God distinctly made male and female. So just keep that in the back of your head. All right. Let's jump forward to the Roman Republic. Okay, so we went from classical Greece here. We're going to do the Roman Republic. Overlaps a little bit here. Switching over to the Romans briefly. Okay, so absolute power of the head of the family group. He was called the pater. The pater is basically the male. He's either the father or the husband. The absolute unlimited power, aka manus, over the slaves, sons, and women. So a Roman girl who survived the womb, if she wasn't aborted, and if she wasn't exposed, both of which were widely practiced, and both of which were the authority of the male, he got to decide who lived or died. So if she actually survived abortion or exposure, it was the right of the father to figure out what to do with her. And she would be destined typically for an early marriage and another familial power, manus, over her. So she goes from being under the power of the father to being under the power of the spouse. That's pretty much the transition for a woman during the Roman Republic. During the Roman Republic, Roman citizens had 3 names. I'm not going to go into all the detail about that. But women basically only had the family name. They didn't have individual names. Okay? For the Romans, the glory of a woman required that their names never be pronounced. All right? So we're going to get to what they did look at a woman as positive for. But for the Romans, don't talk about the woman. She shouldn't even have a name. Okay. The Roman woman was not as segregated as the Greek woman. So we're advancing out of the gynecium. All right? But not completely. She's just not as segregated as the Greek woman. The Romans did consider behavior honorable for a woman that the Greeks would never allow. Remember I said the Greeks were pretty misogynistic on the scheme of things. The Romans did not shut the woman up in a special part of the house. They did not forbid them to dine with men. They did not forbid them to go out on the streets. The Greek woman, as I said, was a simple tool of reproduction. The Roman woman was a fundamental instrument for the transmission of their culture because they did raise their young. So unlike Greek women, Roman women personally brought up their children, and if they did it well, they were honored in a way that a Greek woman never would have been honored. We see this from some funerary inscriptions. If the woman is actually remembered for anything, it's always listed as being a good wife and a good mother. That was how a woman could make her mark in Roman society during this time. Okay, you often see during the Roman Republic goddesses depicted in the act of nursing. Worship is representative and symbolic of women being faithful to her domestic duties. The different woman who didn't comply with the typical role represented degeneration, corruption, and danger. The model for the Roman Republic woman was always that of the matrona, the wife and mother who in the fulfillment of her family duties forgot herself. That's what they honored. That was the only way that a woman could make a mark. That was the only way that she could be respected. If she was sexually fidelity, and she only cared about serving the rest of her family. All right, let's have another skit, shall we? I would like to please have, I need the Roman Senator Cato to come on up, if you will. And I also need the Roman Republic woman. Come on up, Debbie. And the Roman tribute Valerius. Okay, so my Roman Republic woman, here you are. You've got a little ring to dress you up. Not that you need it, you're so beautiful anyway. All right, Roman tribute Valerius, there you go. And my Roman Senator Cato, you get to wear the outfit. All right, this should be pretty simple to slip on. You just hold it up if you want. Okay, so I'm going to set the stage while our actors are kind of prepped there. Thank you so much. Okay. Y'all look wonderful, by the way. It matches the red and the red on. That's great. You do know me well. Okay, so shortly before 200 BC, there was a law called the Opium Law. And basically, this law said that the Roman women could not display their status publicly by means of jewelry, fine clothes, or riding in carriages. Okay, so the law said, no way, you can't tell me that you're married to somebody wealthy or whatever. We don't want to know your status. And so the law, the women didn't like this law, and they wanted to protest it, so we see Debbie voting for her rights. All right, so Roman Senator Cato, I'm going to have you read your line.
I am for this law. I am complaining that the Roman matrons could not be kept at home by advice or modesty or their husbands' orders. They dared even to approach and appeal to the consuls. I consider their actions shameful.
Okay, so the Roman Senate was not happy about these Roman Republic women displaying their status. He wanted the opium law. Tell them they can't do it. Okay, Debbie, I love it. Get into character. Here's Debbie. All right.
Yes! Oh, I want to wear my jewelry, my clothing, and I want to ride in a chariot. Or a carriage.
All right. Okay, Roman tribute Valerius, here's your line.
I'm against this law, and I'm arguing on behalf of the Roman women. Give the women their baubles. These will satisfy their trivial minds and keep them from interfering in more serious matters.
All right. Thank you guys so very much. Okay, so basically what ended up happening, the law was overturned, all right? And the Roman women were allowed to display their status publicly. But as you can see, even the argument for it was rather condescending, to say the least, towards the feminists. So thank you guys so very much. You can just go ahead and put it over there, would be fantastic. Okay, so that was roughly the Roman Republic. We're going to jump back into Greek culture and take a look at the Hellenistic time period now. The Hellenistic age, basically the reason it's called the Hellenistic age, the conquest of Alexander the Great carried Greek culture across the known world, and so it sort of spread. And the bookmarks for basically the Hellenistic time period is the death of Alexander the Great in 323 BC, and the Roman conquest of Egypt, roughly 30 BC. So we will get to that, but this time period, the Hellenistic age, is characterized by profound changes, with women seeing growing respect and a broader chance to participate in social life, as well as an extension of their legal capacity. So a lot of change during this time period. Women were still very much endowed with negative qualities, including a vast love of wine and sex is one of the things that they were supposedly attributed to them. Women were a lot more visible during this time period, especially in stage plots and art, and that was often sexually explicit. So even though they were visible, it wasn't exactly a nice image. Education for women during this time period did increase, and the age difference between husband and wife started to decrease during this time period. So, like I said, the Greeks were pretty misogynistic, but even at this point, the dignity of the individual, even if that individual was a woman, started to be recognized. And like I said before, Egypt had for years recognized women's rights, and they were a bit more advanced in terms of their status on that. So, I am so happy you just came in, Sandy, because we are going to do another skit. Okay, can I please get Cleopatra, Queen Cleopatra, to come on up here, and Octavian and Antony.
Uh-oh.
It's a triangle.
Okay, Octavian, this is yours. All right, Antony, go ahead and stand over by Cleopatra, if you will. All right, now this is very interesting because Antony actually was basically a Roman general, and he was originally on the Roman side. And I'm not going to go into all the history, but basically he's ruling over Egypt to a certain extent. Cleopatra is Queen Cleopatra, she's kind of doing the Egypt thing. But Antony starts to fight on her side against the Roman generals, Octavian being the primary one. So we have some major differences here because in Egypt, like I said, the rights of women were a bit more advanced than the rest of the known world. And Octavian, our Roman general here, he knows where women ought to be, and he's going to make sure that they stay. Oh, I love it. Okay, so this is great. I hadn't even thought about that because I'm not a guy, but that's awesome. Okay, so Cleopatra is going to state a line that's actually attributed to the historian Diodorus Siculus, but we're going to attribute it to Cleopatra for this one. Okay, so Cleopatra, go ahead.
It was ordained that the queen should have greater power and honor than the king, and that among private persons. The wife should enjoy authority over her husband. The husbands agreeing in the marriage contract that they will be obedient in all things to their wives.
Okay, very different than what we've been looking at here. Okay, so Octavian, you are going to go in and conquer Egypt, but before we do that, we need to make sure that the soldiers keep their values straight. So your line's going to be directed to your soldiers. Here we go.
Maintain the renowned forefathers pledge to preserve your own proud traditions, to allow no woman to make herself equal to a man.
Excellent. All right. Okay, so you are going to go and defeat them. So if you guys want to just kind of, you can sit down in a chair in some sort of subservient position. You guys lost. Sorry. Anthony, there's a chair there or whatever if you want. So Octavian, you have beaten them, and now you are going to taunt your former general with this line.
You fool, I won't even call you a man. You were made weak by the feminist women who ruled you. Shame on you.
Whoa.
Very much for our actors and actresses. Okay, you guys can go ahead and have a seat. Thank you so much.
I like
You're a
her.
little too much into character there.
Well, actually, she was scary. Put down that sword.
Push
You
you
guys
to
are-
crazy.
Okay, so we saw that there were some major differences between the Roman Republic, the Hellenistic time period, and then, of course, with the conquering of Egypt ends the Hellenistic time period. So we're going to basically look, this is the time period where the Republic is transitioning to an empire. Octavian, who defeated the Egyptians, he's going to be the first emperor. His name's going to be changed to Augustus. It's just a little sidebar. But during this transition time period, the Roman Republic to the Roman Empire, about 100 BC to 50 AD, we've got a lot of mystery religions flooding into the western part of the empire towards the end of the Republic and the beginning of the empire. Most conservative Romans viewed these religions with disgust. This became a problem for Christians, fast forward a few years, who had to distinguish themselves from these groups. And since Christianity came from the East, which traditionally was a source of many cults, entertainers, and immoral adventurers, this was no easy task. All right, so the cults and the different religions that are flooding into the Roman Empire towards the end of the Republic are very, very concerning to the Romans. The traditional cults of the Roman religions defended themselves against any force that threatened change or permitted new attitudes about women. Again, they liked their viewpoints, they had them for hundreds of years, nothing was going to change it. The spread of the new cults disturbed the established order and threw into confusion the homes of the Romans. So a lot of upheaval going on here. The cults were viewed as a cause of inadmissible licentiousness. All right, so major problem for the established order, lots of new ideas coming in. These cults often accepted a variety of women that never would have had contact with each other otherwise. And they often had a mysterious sexual nature in their worship. That's important to remember because, again, when we get into the birth of the early church, this is some of the chaotic environment surrounding it. Liberties were being claimed by those who normally would never question their inferior status. Slaves thought that they were good enough to be free, and forgive that expression, but I'm just getting in character. And women believed themselves actual persons equal to men. So this is the hotbed social upheaval and religious upheaval towards the birth of the early church. So just something to keep in mind as we will look at that in a future week. Okay, so we are going to make the transition officially to the Roman Empire here, about 49 BC to 476 AD. Happened under Augustus, and it's very interesting because marriage actually underwent one of the biggest changes during this time period. And it's very rarely in history there's been a concept with such great freedom to divorce, at least at the legal level. It was happening all over the place. Towards the end of the Republic, it was not uncommon for a husband to divorce his wife upon returning from an extended tour of duty, simply on the assumption that she'd been unfaithful. Okay, women were, deemed unable to control their sexual passions. So if the husband goes away for 4 or 5 months, well, clearly she wouldn't have been able to control herself. So when he comes back, she must have committed adultery. It's just in her nature, and just, okay, divorced. So this is that time period. When Augustus renames himself Octavian, a couple of new population laws designed to try to increase the population size, implemented from about 18 to 9 BC. They were to ensure the growth and stability of families by imposing stiff penalties for adultery and by rewarding large families. So marriage becomes basically under state protection. The family becomes under state protection. The idea of it was that it was a basic necessity, necessary evil for the good of the state, all right, because marriage produces kids, and kids become citizens or future soldiers. So marriage needed to be controlled in their mind by the state. So family came under state protection. Some of Augustus's laws, I'm not going to go into all of the fancy titles, but one of them, Lexus Juliae, basically offered inducements to marriage and imposed disabilities upon the celibate. So if you wanted to consecrate yourself to God, or if you were barren, well, you were going to be punished. And it's very interesting, too, because if you produced enough kids, you'd actually have some more legal rights. A free woman had to produce 3 legitimate children in order to not need a guardian anymore for legal affairs. So if she produced enough people, we can give her a few more rights. A freed woman, so basically she was a slave, but then she became free. She had to produce an extra one. So she had to produce 4 kids in order to have a little bit more legal capacities. So a lot of it, do this and we'll give you this. They also, these population policies obligated the widows and the divorced to remarry. Maybe you didn't want to, but you needed to. And it rewarded large families. So, Roman Empire, women still very much considered inferior to men. Seclusion was still a part of the Roman woman's life in the early years of Rome. She wasn't as locked up as she was in classical Greece, but seclusion was still a part of her life. Many Roman women were slaves, and according to Roman law, you could only marry if you were free. Okay, so if you fall in love with a fellow slave, it might seem like you're married or have kids, but legally you weren't. And remember, those kids do not belong to you. So it makes sense that a lot of people would want to get out of slavery. We're going to look at that in a couple more weeks. Marriage during this time period is usually at an early age, usually about 14. I believe you were officially qualified at 12 years and 1 day, but average age here about 14 for women. Prevented any further education. Life expectancy during this time period we would consider today about middle age. So if you're going to be rewarded for producing kids, you're going to have more freedom for that, you better start a family early. Legally, the Roman woman didn't have any significant increase in her rights, but practically she did have a bit more freedom. Okay, so we see here, we're starting to see some tension between the established political order and the social conscience. The freedom that she did have brought some widespread moral laxity. I mean, if you'd been kind of confined for a while, you might get a little bit crazy if they start to release some bombs on you. Anyway, that was the situation during part of the Roman Empire. The old custom, remember how I said there was the father or the husband had all the power, manus over the wife, the kids, the slaves. That custom started to diminish under the Roman Empire. It wasn't quite as clear-cut. Eventually, this is again, fast forward quite a bit, the end of the 2nd century, so the end of the apostolic age, eventually women did study subjects such as philosophy, rhetoric, and law that were previously the domain of men, and they attended major social events and participated in sports formerly considered suitable for men only. So we've got a major change in what women are allowed to do. The women's movement started kind of in the early Roman Empire. We're going to look at that basically from the position of the Roman matron. She was the dominant figure, female figure of her time period, typically of the aristocracy. She was socially prominent, which pretty much meant that her husband was in politics or business, or politics or the military, excuse me. She was looked at as articulate, forceful, and influential. In essence, she was the liberated woman of her day. She did have a healthy relationship with her husband. She could eat with him. They could engage in some informed discussion. She did have some education. And she had some more freedom to be involved outside of the home in social activities. So, I think it's time for another skit. Can I please have Jay Levy come on up? And I also need the Roman matron to please come on up. All right, Roman matron, here you are. All right, Jay Levy. And I think we've got you at the last one.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You're good. I like the enthusiasm. Excellent. Okay. All right, so we have our Roman matron. She's voting for women's rights. She's, trying to be socially out there. And Jay Levy, you are a Roman historian, basically from 64 BC to 17 AD. That was your time span. And this is how you're going to respond to the Roman matron, Roman rights movement.
Are you serious? Really? Women were already difficult to control when they were held by the chains of the old laws. But if we give them freedom, if we give them rights like our own, what will happen? When they are equal miracle, OMG, they will have become superior.
The man in the shades.
Bring it.
No fighting in India. Okay, no, wonderful. Thank you guys so much. Okay, so obviously a lot of social upheaval going on here, and I think you can see too kind of the invisible fear of the power of women equal, and he's already worried about being inferior. He's not even okay with being equal, but then if they're equal, he must be superior. So an invisible fear of the power of women is right there. Okay, so Roman Empire. This is where I'm talking about some of the tensions between the political system and the social conscience. Roman law and the rights of women was starting to advance over the tradition of the Jewish rabbis. This is important. This affected the environment in which Paul preached, okay? So we've got the laws advancing, the Jews are like, whoa, 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 this is not cool. In spite of the strong legal developments of this time period, after Augustus ascended to emperor, became the first emperor, and in spite of the emergence of the strong upper-class woman, our Roman matron, moral conservatism did continue. So we've got some partial supported legislation of women's rights, but the social conscience is not on board. Okay, it's accepted with enormous difficulty. So you can see the tension already between the social structures, the political structures, the religious structures. Everything's starting to come to a bit of a boil here. Okay, so let's look at our last culture for today. We're going to look at the Jews. For Jews, marriage was sacred, but the organization and ideology of the family was not favorable to women, who were viewed solely as an instrument of procreation and completely under male power, who could have more than one wife and divorce them at will. Okay, the Romans were monogamous. The Jews allowed polygamy. I'm not saying it was widely practiced, but they didn't say you couldn't do it. Okay, so there was some polygamy amongst the Jews. Minor failures in carrying out her duties as a Jewish wife and mother could constitute grounds for divorce. Some later rabbis even considered bad breath or the size of her bosoms to be a factor. Okay, Jewish law and tradition. Jewish writings have both lofty statements of the worth of women, primarily as wives and mothers. Again, they had their place and they were valued in that place. But lots of opinions regarding that place. Rabbinical opinions are actually very, very strong regarding women, and they're often quoted for stun effect. I am not going to do that today. I'm going to bring up a different example to illustrate their opinions about women. There's an entire section of the Talmud that's devoted to women's matters called the Nashim. And we know that women did not count in terms of the minimal number necessary to form a congregation. It was only the men. So we needed 10 males to form a Jewish synagogue. So let's just see how many people we have in the room at the moment. So we got 16 people, so we ought to be enough to form a synagogue, right? Do we have 10 men? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Sorry guys, you're out of luck. No synagogue for you and no synagogue for us. So, okay. We are going to take a brief look at Deborah and Judges. If you're interested in the whole story, Judges chapter 4, Judges chapter 5. All right? Nikki, I'm going to have you just go ahead and read that for me, if you will.
Okay. Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapido, whatever, was leading Israel at the time. She held court under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites came to her to have their disputes decided.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you. The reason I'm bringing this up, okay, Old Testament Deborah, this is way before what we're talking about. However, how the Jewish rabbis viewed this story is very enlightening to their view of women and the Old Testament. So we see Deborah as a prophetess. She's female. She's a prophetess. Was leading Israel at the time. I've looked through. I can't find a negative reference about her leadership time period biblically. And the Israelites came to her. They voluntarily said, okay, Mrs. Deborah, we've got conflict. We need you to help us out here. Okay, she was the acknowledged ruler of the Israelite people. Okay, Sandy, would you read that one for me, please?
She sent for Barak, son of Abinah, from Kadesh in Nephratahai, and said to him, the Lord, the God of Israel, commands you. Go take with you 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun
military leader, saying, okay, you're going to lead the guys, and you're going to conquer this army. And he says, okay, well, if you come, I'll go. If you don't, forget it. I'm not going to listen to the word of God. You got to come with me. She said, all right, I'll go with you, but just because of the way you're going about this, the honor's not going to be yours. He's going to hand the destruction of Sisera over to a woman, over the military man. Sorry, but we had pride as an issue with the guys before. That's got to be a major ouch. Okay, the military male leader doesn't get to destroy the enemy. It's a female who gets to do it. And the woman who does it, her name is Jael. She does the tent peg through his temple, and that's how Sisera dies. So it's not Deborah who gets the honor. It's another female. Okay, so what's interesting here, well, there's a lot of things interesting here, but Deborah had a very special relationship with God in terms of being the prophetess, the acknowledged leader of Israel, but her gender did define the roles of leadership in which she could function with God's blessing. God did not say, I want you to lead the military. He said, I want Barak to lead the military. But his response was very conditional to her. The consequence of him was he didn't get to kill Sisera. Sisera would be killed by a woman, not the Israelite military leader. Again, from a male pride standpoint, that's got to be an ouch. Okay. So, what's very interesting, I found biblically, I haven't found a negative reference to Deborah. She's portrayed in a strongly positive and respectful light. But this was very hard for the later rabbis to swallow. Okay, this is a female leader centuries and centuries before their time. And her name literally means honeybee. But the Jewish rabbis at this time period rendered it hornet, okay, in an attempt to ridicule a woman who they thought had overstepped her bounds. I find this very, very enlightening because Deborah went to Barak. She said, this is what God told us to do, and this is your job. And he says, well, I'll do it if, and I won't do it if. And so she goes along with it, but his response was extremely conditional. And she let him, she let him have his say. She didn't say, go and do it, or you're going to be, okay, well, if that's what you want, then yeah, sure, I'll go with you. I mean, she was very accommodating to his conditional response to God's command. And she was seen in a very negative light from a rabbinical viewpoint. So, again, just kind of wanted to point that out as opposed to listing up here a lot of the other rabbinical quotes about women, which are less than flattering. So, just for, hope that helped. Okay, let's have another reenactment. Can I have the Jewish female and the Jewish male come on up, please?
Well, it seems to me that God still views.
If you can hang on for just a second, Katie.
Oh,
So
I didn't mean to say that out loud. I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's all right.
Sorry.
Okay, I apologize, Nikki, but you are very clean, but not for this illustration.
It's only till the
I love
evening.
you. Okay, so we can all pretend she's got a veil on. She's considered unclean. Okay. Now. Okay, you ready for your line? All right, our Jewish male. He is going to recite something. Here we go.
Praise be God that He has not created me a Gentile. Praise be God that He has not created me a woman. Praise be God that He has not created me an ignorant man.
Very good there. Thank you. This particular prayer was recited very frequently. It was recited with great passion. It occurs in three specific traditions and was really ingrained in the Jewish law. So there are some people, and they're basically saying that he is grateful that he can study the Torah. Okay, women were exempt from studying the Torah. Now, exempt didn't mean she couldn't. All right, basically said she doesn't have to. But because of the situation at the time, her ability to study the Torah as a Jewish female would have been extremely limited. Okay, so yes, he might be grateful here that he can learn the law, but I dare say he probably could have said it in a little bit of a different way. Okay, and our Jewish female over here, we are going to talk briefly about the challenge that she has, that all females would have with uncleanliness. This is a constant battle that a female could never win. These references are from Leviticus. Basically, the monthly period was is deemed to last 7 days. Anyone who touches her or anything that she touched would be unclean till evening. So, Nikki, I'm going to have you go ahead and sit in that chair. Okay, go ahead and get up. Come on over. Okay, you can go ahead and sit down. Okay, now poor Dick is unclean till evening. Okay? So, how does she function? It must have been incredibly difficult. We have modern conveniences and it can be a challenge sometimes. Sex is forbidden during the time period of her monthly period. A new woman was unclean for 7 days if it was a male, and then she needed purification rites after 33 if it was a male child. Okay? If it was a female, everything was doubled. Okay? Females were polluted, they were not as great. So 14 days she's unclean, and then she needs purification rites after more than 2 months. Okay, 66 days. During this time, she can't touch anything sacred. She can't go to the sanctuary until the days of her purification are over. So she is totally isolated from religious life, social life, political life. Great, you bore a child, that's your primary function, right? But no, we still have to keep you over there. So anyway, just a very difficult thing. And these are God's laws, okay? This is from Leviticus. The Jews didn't make this up. I can't, what God said, I'm not here to argue with it. What I'm here to point out is that it must have been incredibly difficult for a woman to manage her bodily functions and still function in society. All right, this greatly limits any potential she's got to interact with others, especially when her primary purpose is to bear children, and that requires the stuff that makes her unclean. All right, so it's an unwinnable battle here for the woman. Okay, thank you, Jewish male and Jewish female. You're all clean. Sorry, I put that on the list here. I didn't mean to. Okay. So, you're doing great time-wise, praise the Lord. Okay, we're going to look very briefly, because we're going to delve into this in future weeks on honor and shame concepts. These were central values in ancient Mediterranean society. They're very closely related to sexuality and gender distinction, and they're incredibly important when it comes to public opinion. And we're going to be looking at that extensively in upcoming weeks. So men protect honor, operate in the public realm. Women embody shame and function only in the private domestic sphere. Okay, so for our purposes, we're going to look at shame being concern for reputation. Okay, so the woman upheld the concern for reputation. Basically, you've got men's status being somewhat determined by the behavior of his wife or his woman. If she's being outside of her regular quarters or her sphere, that's going to reflect negatively on him. So he is going to try to basically keep her under wraps. When the values of honor and shame are present in a community, there's a strong inclination to communicate concern for reputation